The night smelled like rain and pine and something electric, like the sky was thinking about doing something it would regret. Sol pressed his belly flat against the ridge and looked down into the valley below the nesting grounds. His gold and silver scales caught the moonlight and scattered it in small pieces across the rocks. He was supposed to be sleeping. Every other broodling in the nest was sleeping. Elder Vorin herself had checked twice. But Sol had never been good at sleeping when the world was just sitting there, full of things he had not seen yet. He told himself he would only look, just from the ridge. He would not go down. He went down. The valley was wider than it looked from above. Strange tall plants grew in neat rows, which Sol found deeply suspicious. Nothing in nature grew in neat rows. Something had put them there. Something had planned them. He crept between the rows with his wings folded tight and his tail curled up so it would not drag through the soft, dark earth. Then he saw the house. It was small. It sat in the middle of a cleared space, and it glowed from within, warm orange light pouring out of its square eyes. Sol had seen human structures from the sky before, from a safe and approved distance during Elder Vorin's geography lessons, but he had never been close enough to see the light inside them. He moved toward it the way water moves toward a drain, slowly at first, then all at once. He stopped at the wall and stood on his hind legs, long neck stretching up, and looked through the glowing square. There were 4 of them, a woman with dark hair who moved fast and sure, carrying things from one surface to another. A man sitting in a chair near the wall, his leg wrapped in something white, his face tired but soft. A small girl, very young, asleep on a cushion near the floor. And a boy, maybe 10 years old in human years, sitting at a table, drawing something on a piece of paper with a stick that left marks. Sol watched them for a long time. The woman said something and the man laughed. It was not a large laugh. It was the kind of laugh that comes from being tired and still glad. The boy looked up from his drawing and smiled at nothing in particular, just smiled because the sound of the laugh was good. Sol had never seen anything like it. Among the droven, warmth was expressed in low rumbles and the slow sharing of body heat during cold seasons. It was dignified. It was ancient. It did not look like this. This looked like something else entirely, something smaller and louder and much harder to name. He leaned closer. His elbow pressed into the wall, a soft thud. The boy's head turned. Sol dropped. He pressed himself against the base of the wall in the dark and held completely still. His bioluminescence, which he was still learning to control, flickered once, twice, then went dim. He squeezed his eyes shut. Silence. Then the soft creak of the door, then footsteps on the porch, small ones. Sol did not move. The footsteps stopped. He opened one eye just slightly. The boy was standing on the porch, looking directly at him, not screaming, not running, not calling for the woman with the fast hands, just standing there in the cold night air in his socks, holding his drawing stick, looking at Sol with wide, dark eyes. Then he raised one hand and waved, slow, simple, just a wave. Sol stared at him. Then Sol ran. He scrambled back up the ridge on all 4 legs, faster than he had ever moved, his wings half open for balance, small stones scattering behind him. He did not stop until he was back inside the nest, breathing hard, pressed into the far corner of his sleeping hollow with his tail wrapped around himself twice. He had dropped something on the way. He would not realize until morning that it was one of his own scales, shaken loose in his panic, left behind on the dark ground near the wall. But he remembered the boy's face clearly, the total lack of fear in it, the simple, calm gesture of one hand raised in greeting. In the morning, Elder Vorin recited the rules to all the broodlings during the first lesson, as she did every morning. No broodling leaves the nest unsupervised. No broodling makes contact with unregistered species. No broodling uses droven ability without Concord approval. No exceptions, no excuses. The rules exist because we are old and they are fragile, and power without care is just destruction wearing a polite face. Sol sat in the back and listened and said nothing. But in his mind, in the quiet place behind his eyes where Elder Vorin could not reach. He was still standing in the dark below a glowing window, watching a family be warm, and a boy was waving at him from a porch, unafraid. It was the strangest and most beautiful thing Sol had ever seen. He wanted to see it again. The scale sat on Rory's windowsill for 3 days before he told anyone about it. He had found it the morning after the creature disappeared into the dark. It was the size of his palm, gold along the edges and silver in the middle, and it glowed very softly like a coal that had forgotten how to go out. It was warm, not hot, just warm, the way a stone is warm after a long afternoon in the sun. He did not tell his mother. He did not tell his father, who was still stuck in the chair with his wrapped leg and his quiet face. He kept the scale under his pillow at night and thought about the creature pressed against their wall in the dark, big amber eyes blinking at him before it ran. On the 4th night, Rory left a drawing on the porch. He had spent most of the afternoon on it. It was a dragon. It did not look very much like the actual creature he had seen, but he had tried his best. Under it he wrote, "I am not scared of you." He went back inside and watched from the window. Near midnight, a shape moved along the fence line. It stopped at the porch. A long neck stretched out. The drawing was picked up in careful clawed fingers and examined for a long time. Then the shape was gone. Rory smiled and went to bed. After that, the visits became a rhythm. Sol came every few nights, always after dark, always quiet. Rory began leaving things, a piece of dried fruit, which Sol smelled carefully for 5 full minutes before refusing, a small smooth stone with a good weight, a second drawing better than the first. Sol left things too. Twice Rory found a single perfect feather from some high mountain bird, the kind that did not come to the valley. Once he found a small piece of river-polished blue crystal sitting precisely in the center of the porch step. Then came the first words. Rory had taken to sitting on the porch with a blanket around his shoulders, and Sol had taken to sitting just outside the fence, which was close enough. One night Rory pointed at himself and said his name slowly. Rory. Then he pointed at Sol. Sol was quiet for a moment. Then, in a voice like rocks being moved by water, he tried the sound back, Rory, and then he touched a claw to his own chest and said, Sol. Rory repeated it, Sol, and Sol made a sound that Rory eventually understood was something close to satisfaction. After that, Rory taught him one word every visit. Animal, sky, cold, house, hurt, good. The words Sol picked up fastest were the ones Rory used most. Stay, come back, look, see. It took 4 months before Sol could hold a full sentence together, but when he finally could, the first thing he said clearly was, the drawings, I keep them, all of them. Rory grinned, so wide it hurt his face. Dara found out on a Tuesday in the 5th month. She had gotten up before dawn to check on Cal and had seen the shape outside the fence from the kitchen window. She stood very still for a full minute, watching Sol and Rory sit in comfortable silence, looking at the stars. Then she put on her jacket and walked outside. Sol saw her coming and went absolutely rigid, every muscle in his body locked. He was 3 times the size of any human in the family, and he looked, in that moment, like a very large creature that wanted very badly to disappear. Dara looked at him for a long time, then she looked at Rory, then she said, he is not hurting you. It was not a question. No, Rory said, he is my friend. Dara breathed out. She looked at Sol again. His amber eyes looked back. There was nothing in them that she could call dangerous. There was something in them she recognized from Rory at age 4, looking at the world like everything in it was a question worth asking. She said, you stay away from the survey drones. You come nowhere near the path on the east side. You do not let anyone from the Concord see you here. If you can agree to that, you can keep coming. Sol looked at her steadily. Then he said, carefully, I agree, thank you. Dara went back inside without another word. It was not long after that Sol heard Cal's breathing through the thin wall one night, tight and wrong. The sound of pain that had gone on too long. He did it without thinking. He breathed out slowly, a long, pale breath that carried the Droven healing compound in its mist and let it drift through the open window gap. He knew it was against the rules. He knew it the moment he did it. But Cal's breathing eased within the hour, and in the morning, Rory said his father had slept through the night for the first time in 2 months. Sol said nothing about what he had done. He sat on the fence post and watched the sunrise with Rory and let the guilt and the satisfaction sit side by side inside him without resolving either one. The family called Cal's improvement good luck, better medicine, a good stretch of rest. Sol let them believe it. For a while, everything was quiet and good. Then the survey schedule changed. The Concord ship did not announce itself. It simply appeared in the sky one afternoon, a grey wedge hanging above the valley like a bad thought, and then it set down outside the colony perimeter with the quiet confidence of something that did not need permission. Sol saw it from the ridge. He watched it for a long time, still as stone, his tail tight around a tree root. He knew what the Concord symbol on the hull meant. Every broodling learned the symbol in their first year. It was the mark of people who counted things and wrote down what did not match. He did not go to the Walsh homestead that night. Magistrate Orrin came to the colony the next morning. He was tall for a Velid, which meant he was very tall, thin, and angled in the way of his species, with compound eyes that moved slowly and saw more than they appeared to. He had 2 officers with him. He had paperwork. He always had paperwork. His stated purpose was a routine colonial compliance review. His real purpose, as Dara understood the moment she saw his eyes move to the eastern fence line, was something else. He interviewed Dara in the main room while one officer walked the perimeter with a scanner. He asked standard questions at first: population count, medical logs, infrastructure reports. Dara answered each one exactly, no more and no less than was asked. Then Orrin put a small device on the table between them. It displayed a heat map of the homestead property over the last 6 months. In the map, there were traces, faint, recurring, concentrated near the fence and the porch, a signature that did not match any human biological marker. Dara looked at the map, then she looked at Orrin. Her face did not change. He said, "These readings indicate repeated presence of a non-human biological entity of significant mass and thermal output. Are you aware of any such entity?" Dara said, "I am not a biologist. I would not know how to read those measurements." Orrin said, "I will ask more simply. Has anything come to this property that does not belong here?" Dara said, "Everything on this property belongs here. We licensed it." Orrin let the silence sit for a moment, then he asked to speak with the boy. Rory sat across from Orrin at the kitchen table and gave nothing. Not a flinch, not a hesitation, not a word that Orrin could use. He answered every question with the steady calm of a child who had decided before the conversation began that he was not going to lose it. What he did not expect was Orrin walking to his room. The officer with the scanner had flagged the bedroom. Orrin stood in the doorway, compound eyes moving slowly across the shelves, the desk, the windowsill. Then they stopped. He picked up the wooden dragon Rory had carved. He turned it in his long fingers. It was a rough thing made from a piece of fence post, shaped with a pocket knife over several evenings, but it had scales carved into the neck. It had wing joints. It had amber stones pushed into the face for eyes. He said, "What is this?" Rory said, "A carving. I made it." Orrin said, "It is very specific for something imagined." He took it. He slid it into an evidence bag. Rory watched it go and kept his face still, but something behind his eyes went tight. Outside, Sol crouched in the tree line 100 meters back, watching through the gaps in the brush. He had come at first light, not to visit, just to watch, just to know. He saw the officer with the scanner. He saw the heat map device carried inside. He understood, in the way that a creature understands something it hoped would not be true, what was happening. He saw the carved dragon go into the bag. He felt something he could not name move through him. It was not quite fear. It was the feeling of understanding that something small and good was being measured and found inconvenient. Oren stood on the porch before leaving and told Dara that a formal hearing would be held in 72 hours at the Concord outpost. If Drovin contact was confirmed, the Walsh family's colonial license would be reviewed. Relocation was a possible outcome. He said it like he was reading a weather report. Dara said, "Understood." The ship's officers left. Dara stood on the porch until the sound of their vehicle was gone. Then she turned and looked at the tree line at the place where Sol had been, though he was already gone. She said quietly, to no one visible, "You need to stay away. This is not your problem." She went back inside. She did not know that Sol had heard her. She did not know that Sol had understood that she was trying to protect him by saying it. She did not know that the word problem had landed wrong in his chest, not because it was unkind, but because it was exactly the kind of thing someone said when they were about to get hurt alone and had decided that was fine. Sol flew back to the nesting grounds and landed and walked to Elder Vorin and stood in front of her. He told her everything, every visit, every word taught, the scale, the drawings, the healing breath, the carved dragon in the evidence bag. Vorin's silence was very long. When she finally spoke, her voice was the sound of glaciers deciding something. She said, "You have broken every rule we have." Sol said, "I know." She said, "And you came to tell me yourself." He said, "Yes." She said nothing more. She looked at him with eyes that had seen centuries of decisions and their consequences. She did not send him away. She did not punish him, not yet. She simply turned and looked toward the valley below, where a hearing was being scheduled, where a family was sitting quietly in their house, and where a wooden dragon with amber stone eyes was now sitting in an evidence bag in a Concord officer's cold metal locker. Outside the nest, the sky was turning the color of an old bruise. The 72 hours had started. Vorin did not punish Sol that first night. Instead, she took him to the old part of the nest, the deep stone chamber where the walls were carved with history in the Drovin way, not pictures, but grooves, long curves and angles that told stories through shape. She sat and told him one. Thousands of years ago, she said, there was a young Drovin named Uruvath. Uruvath had bonded with a species called the Solani, small, warm, quick-lived, with 6 eyes and a singing language and hands that were always doing something. Uruvath loved them deeply. Uruvath helped them build, protected their cities, carried their messages across oceans. The Drovin Council of that time warned Uruvath. Uruvath would not listen. The Solani were gone within 400 years, not because of Uruvath, because of a shifting star and a slow atmospheric collapse. Uruvath lived another 8,000 years after that, alone, carrying the weight of everyone it had loved who could not live as long as it could. The lesson, Vorin said, is not that caring is wrong. The lesson is that we outlive everything we attach to. The rules exist, so we do not destroy ourselves over the ones we cannot save. Sol was quiet for a while. Then he said, "But what if we could have saved the Solani? What if a Drovin with the right knowledge had been there and had stayed away because of the rules and watched them die properly instead?" Vorin looked at him for a long moment. Then she said, "You are confined to the nest until after the hearing." That was all. Sol went to his sleeping hollow and lay with his chin on the stone floor and stared at the wall and thought about the carved dragon in the evidence bag. He thought about Rory's face when the officer walked out with it. He thought about Dara saying, "You need to stay away. This is not your problem," in the voice people use when they have already decided to bear something alone. 40 meters below, through rock and soil and tree roots, the valley held the Walsh house and its lit windows and its 4 people sitting inside, waiting for a hearing that could take their home. At the Concord outpost, the hearing began at the 2nd hour of the morning on the 3rd day. Dara sat across from Oren at a flat table and spoke with the measured precision of someone who had spent 20 years building things in difficult conditions and knew exactly how to read a set of structural forces before deciding where to push. She said the energy signatures Oren's team had detected could have numerous environmental explanations. She said she had no formal scientific training and therefore had no opinion on what the readings meant. She said she was a licensed colonial resident of 7 years with a clean compliance record and 2 children, one of whom was 10 years old and had recently recovered from an illness, and she would appreciate it if the magistrate would clarify exactly what law she had violated before suggesting relocation. She did not raise her voice once. Oren sat across from her and listened and wrote things down and then said, "We have subpoenaed your husband's medical records. A Concord medical team will examine him in 18 hours. If his blood shows elevated levels of Drovin healing compound, that is direct biological evidence of contact and use of restricted ability. No further testimony will be needed." Dara's pen stopped moving. It was the only tell she gave him. Warden Selka, who had been quiet in the corner for most of the hearing, leaned forward slightly. She said, "Magistrate, the subpoena for personal medical records in a colonial compliance case requires a secondary sign-off from a regional commander. Have you obtained that?" Oren looked at her. She looked back with the steady patience of someone who knew the answer before asking the question. Oren said, "That is being processed." Selka said, "Then the medical examination cannot proceed until it is approved. That is the procedure." Oren said, "It will be approved within the day." Selka said, "Then we wait for the day. Shall I note the delay in the proceedings log?" The air in the room was very flat. Oren said, "Note it." The hearing paused on a procedural hold. Dara was escorted back to a waiting area. She sat and stared at the floor and did the math in her head. Cal's blood, the healing compound, the hours until the secondary approval came through. She did not have a way to explain away something that would be in his cells. There was no good answer waiting at the end of that particular path. She thought, "We are going to lose the farm." She thought, "I should have told Sol to stay away sooner." She thought, but Rory was so happy. And then she stopped thinking and just sat with it, the way she had learned to sit with hard things, without running from them, without falling into them, just holding the weight of them at arm's length and breathing. In the nest, Sol had been lying still for 6 hours when the news about the medical examination reached him through the Drovin communication network. A broodling from the outer nest, who monitored Concord legal channels, had passed the information along as routine chatter. Sol heard it and stood up. He paced his hollow for 2 minutes. Then he walked to the edge of the nest, where the ridge dropped away toward the valley. The lights of the Concord outpost were visible below, small and cold against the dark. Cal's blood had Drovin compound in it because of what Sol had done. Dara and Cal and Rory and the little girl asleep on the cushion were going to be moved off a farm they had built with their hands because Sol had breathed healing into a sick man through a window gap and had not thought about what it would leave behind. The rules said, "Stay." Sol looked at the lights below for another moment. Then he opened his wings in the dark and stepped off the ridge. The perimeter sensors at the Concord outpost went off at the same time. Every one of them, the motion sensors, the biological scanners, the energy detectors, they all fired together in a single cascading alarm because Sol did not land quietly in the dark on the far side of the fence. He landed in the middle of the front approach road, in full view of the main entrance, at 3 in the morning, gold and silver scales, catching every exterior light the outpost had. He sat down, he waited. Warden Selka came out first. Her hand moved to her sidearm and then stopped. She had worked 6 years in Concord enforcement. She had handled dispute cases, border violations, colonist conflicts, and one memorable incident involving a Thurii merchant and a falsified cargo manifold. She had never walked out of a building to find a juvenile Drovin sitting on her front path like it was waiting for a bus. She said, "Hold on, just hold on, nobody do anything." Behind her, 2 officers emerged with weapons half raised. She held up a hand at them. They froze. Sol looked at her with amber eyes and said, in Concord standard that was slow but very clear, I am Sol. I am a broodling of Elder Vorin of the Droven nesting grounds on Ethon IV. I came here to speak. Selka said, all right, I am listening. Sol said, the Walsh family did nothing against your laws. I did. Every visit was my choice. The contact was my choice. The healing was my choice. If someone needs to answer for those things, I am here. That is me. That is what I am doing right now. Oren appeared in the doorway in his night robes, which was not an image he would have chosen for what was becoming an important moment in his career. He recovered quickly. He stepped past Selka, pulled a recording device from his coat pocket, and clicked it on. He said, this is a confession. Sol said, it is a statement. There is a difference. Oren said, the difference being. Sol said, a confession is given by someone who thinks they did something wrong. A statement is given by someone who wants the facts to be clear. There was a pause. Sol continued. He spoke slowly and without stopping. He described the first night, the window and the light inside it, the boy on the porch who did not run. He described every visit after that, the drawings left and found, the words taught one at a time, the wooden dragon carved from a fence post with a small knife. He described the night he heard Cal breathing in pain and made a choice he knew was against the rules, and made it anyway because the sound of that breathing was unbearable and he was capable of making it stop. He said, your rules exist to protect people from being harmed by those who are more powerful than them. I used my ability to stop a man's suffering. I spent months sitting near a family that was kind to me. I left no damage. I left no fear. I left a scale and some crystals and warm memories and a man who can walk on his own leg again. He looked directly at Oren. He said, your rules exist to protect people. I used them to protect people. If those are the same thing, then I have not broken them. If they are different, then your rules are broken, not me. The silence after that was the kind that happens when something shifts and nobody wants to be the first one to acknowledge it. Selka stepped forward quietly. She had shut off the feed to Oren's official channel and was now recording on her own device, her own private channel, the one that linked directly to the Concord High Archive as a matter of standard officer protocol for significant field events. She clicked a small button. On her device's screen, 3 words appeared, formal species statement. This classification existed in Concord law for exactly this kind of situation, when a non-Concord species made a formal declaration regarding a legal matter. It triggered mandatory review by the full council before any enforcement action could proceed. It was rarely invoked. In the entire history of the Concord, no broodling had ever invoked it. Oren saw what she did. His compound eyes moved between her device and Sol. He said, you cannot take that action without my authorization as presiding magistrate. Selka said, Section 12 of the Field Protocol establishes that a formal species statement is classified independently by the attending officer, not the presiding magistrate. That is precisely to ensure the magistrate cannot block it. She said it without heat, the way someone states the temperature. Oren looked at Sol, Sol looked at Oren, neither of them moved. Then the sky changed. It did not get darker, it got heavier. A pressure settled over the outpost, the kind that comes before a very large thing lands nearby. The officers on the perimeter looked up. The motion sensors, which had only just stopped alarming over Sol, started alarming again and then stopped entirely because the thing that was landing was too large for their scale range. Elder Vorin folded her wings behind her and settled onto the ridge above the outpost. She was the color of deep ocean at sunrise. She was very old and very large, and the ground understood this about her. She looked down at Sol for a long moment. Then she looked at Oren. She said, in perfect Concord standard, in a voice that carried the weight of 8,000 years of careful choices and one broodling who had made her rethink several of them. My broodling has filed his statement. She paused. Then I am here to co-sign it. Oren stood very still on his front step in his night robes with his recording device in his hand. Warden Selka finished filing the statement to the High Archive and put her device back in her coat. Above the outpost, above the valley, above the ridge, the sky was beginning to go from black to the deep blue that comes just before dawn, the color that means the dark is not gone yet, but is running out of time. 3 months is a short time for the Concord to decide anything. It is an extremely long time to wait when you do not know if you still have a home. The Walsh family did not talk about it much. Dara went back to the farm and worked. Cal, who could now walk without the chair, repaired the east fence and built a small stone wall along the vegetable rows and did not mention his blood results or what they implied. The little girl, Nomi, grew 2 centimeters and lost a tooth and had no idea that the fate of her home had been argued about in chambers by beings who had never met her. Rory left a light on the porch every night, not because Sol could visit. Sol was confined to the nest during the review period, which was the formal punishment assigned while the council deliberated. But Rory left the light on anyway. He said it was for the bugs. He meant it was for Sol. The ruling arrived on a quiet afternoon, delivered by Warden Selka personally rather than by the standard communication channel. She came to the farm on foot, alone, without her uniform jacket, which was the Thury way of saying this is not official business. This is a person bringing you news. She told them the results at the kitchen table, with Cal beside Dara and Rory sitting on the counter because he was too restless for a chair. The Walsh family was not to be relocated. Their colonial license was confirmed, their compliance record cleared of any notation. The charges against them were formally dropped on the grounds that they had not initiated contact and had not used any restricted technology or ability. Oren had been issued a formal reprimand for procedural overreach in the matter of the medical subpoena, which had not received the required secondary authorization before being served. The reprimand would sit in his record for 7 years. Selka was promoted to senior field warden for the Ethon sector. The carved wooden dragon was returned in a small package with a Concord seal on it and no note inside. Rory put it back on his desk immediately in the exact spot where it had always been. At the nesting grounds, Sol received his own ruling from Elder Vorin. He was formally censured for violation of all 3 primary rules. He was assigned an extended mentorship period under Vorin's direct supervision, which meant remaining within 3 kilometers of the nest grounds. This was technically a restriction. The nesting grounds were, as they had always been, a 3-minute flight from the Walsh homestead. Sol accepted his censure without argument. He had not expected less. What he had not expected was what Vorin said at the end. She said, "You asked me in the chamber whether a Drovan with the right knowledge might have saved the Solani. I have been thinking about that." Sol waited. She said, "I do not know the answer. I have lived long enough to know I do not know many things I once believed I did. What I know is that you acted to protect people who were fragile, using only what you had, and you did not hide from what came after it. That is not nothing." Sol said, "Is that why you co-signed the statement?" Vorin was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "I co-signed it because you were right, and I have lived long enough to know that being right about the important things is rarer than it should be." She walked away before he could answer. That was Elder Vorin's way of saying everything she had decided to say. The Concord High Council, in a footnote to the ruling that most people missed, noted that Sol's formal species statement had been forwarded to the Subcommittee on Non-Interference Statutes. The subcommittee had been tasked with reviewing the rules as they applied to broodlings near pre-registered colony worlds. Nothing would change quickly. The Concord did not move quickly, but a stone had been dropped in a still pond, and the rings were moving outward whether the pond wanted them to or not. Cal built a gate on the far side of the property, facing the tree line. He made it from good wood and hung it on solid posts. He put a light above it, a warm orange one that ran on a small solar panel, and he wired it to come on automatically at dark and stay on until dawn. He did not say who it was for. He did not need to. Rory made a second carved dragon. He spent more time on it. The scales were better. The wings were actually shaped right. He pushed pieces of amber he had ordered from a colony supply catalog into the face for eyes, real amber, not painted stone, and they caught light the way the real thing did. He left it outside the gate on the evening that Sol's restriction period officially allowed perimeter visits again. In the morning, it was gone. That night after dark, Sol landed on the roof of the Walsh house, not on the ground, not at the fence, on the roof, which was flat in the back and faced the sky. Rory came out of the attic window and climbed up and sat beside him, a blanket around his shoulders, his breath making small clouds in the cold air. They looked at the stars for a long time without talking. Then Rory said, "Why did you do it? You knew what would happen. You knew you would get in trouble." Sol thought about this carefully, the way he thought about things that mattered. He turned it around in his mind and looked at all its sides. Then he said, "Because you waved." Rory nodded slowly. He looked up at the stars for a moment. Then he said, "That is a good reason." Sol said, "It is the best one." Above them, the stars were steady and cold and very far away, and did not care about the rules of anyone living beneath them. Below them, in the lit warm house, Cal was reading to Nomi before bed, and Dara was at the table with her engineering plans, and everything was ordinary and whole. Sol breathed out slowly. His bioluminescence came on softly, gold and silver, the way it did when he was calm. It lit the roof in a small, warm circle. Rory leaned back on his hands and looked up into it. He said, "Same time tomorrow." Sol said, "Same time tomorrow." And that was that.